expectation.
Yep. Listen.
Ready to go? Recording? All right, well, welcome back.
Hey.
I like the 2-week break better than the few day break. That was a little better.
Except you were sick.
Well, that's all right though. I like the 2-week break
You could
better.
be
Still,
sick.
I could be sick, right? So that's all right. I think there's no one new right now to the group, right? We're all here last time, so we don't need to reintroduce ourselves. So we should be good to go unless someone feels like we need another introduction. No? Okay. So last time we got together, we said we would just continue the work that we started this time. We last time identified strands, began to identify clusters, and then we brainstormed some ideas, general ideas around those clusters. So we can just pick up where we left off. We started with I put the strands over here, and then I put the first clusters over there because we're not gonna probably need them. We're not gonna be working with that one today, but I figured I'd put them up there so that they were available. So we started with reading literary text. We brainstormed a bunch of stuff and came up with 3 clusters, so there they are. And then after we brainstormed those 3 clusters, we brainstormed a bunch more of ideas that fall underneath each one, general statements that I thought would be a good idea for us to revisit kind of on the back end. So like go back through and clean everything up so we can feel really good about what we have for reading literary, reading nonfiction, speaking and listening, and writing. So we said we'd start today with reading nonfiction. Right? All right, so I'm happy to continue to be the chart person unless someone else wants that very wonderful, exciting, prestigious job.
You're so good. You are so good.
You guys are such liars. That's what you are. Mm-hmm. Yep, no one wants to be up in the front of the room writing on the board, I understand. Okay, so are you ready to dive into nonfiction? Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to think about what our clusters would be around nonfiction. So I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the last time we went down that road, we kind of brainstormed everything we could think of that would fall under nonfiction, or under fiction, sorry, under literary text. And then we kind of narrowed that down to those 3 basic things. So I have 2 questions. One question is, do you want to repeat that process that we did last time? That's question number 1. Question number 2 is, do you want to consider the 3 that we already have, because it's reading, and decide, do those things just automatically also fall under nonfiction, or do they not? Or do we need to work through that whole brainstorming process first to determine if they both fall under there? Does that make sense? So that's a question. Hi, good morning.
Hi, Karen.
Hi.
I have a chair over here. for you.
Okay, I have sit in the front because I'm like, I have a question.
You get to sit by me.
Just sit.
Yeah, don't trip.
Carrie,
Yeah.
backing up to the strands.
Yeah.
We were talking last time about not having a language strand.
Yes, and how we were going to embed that in
Now,
reading and
Yes,
writing.
so my question was,
Speaking and listening.
yes, is it embedded as in written into the areas?
I think I was the one that suggested
Yes.
that, and that was what I thought. I mean, the Common Core standards, i.e. Missouri Learning Standards, do have that strand, but I don't know that that means, my feeling is we don't necessarily have to have it in ours, because we can embed all of
Right.
those things in the reading and the writing.
It makes me really uncomfortable to think about not having it.
Okay.
Especially 6th or 8th. I mean, you can almost drop it at 9th grade, because 8th grade, I feel like they've got pretty much everything ready to go for high school. They should. But I don't know, I just feel like some of the things are not going to be taught as well as they should, or hit as hard.
let me ask you this, and since in the current standards that we have, which are the Missouri Learning Standards, that strand has the grammar, conventions portion, and then it has a vocabulary portion. Are you advocating both of those, or just one of them?
Well, I like the grammar,
Yeah.
and the South Carolina model, I liked what they had. They had a box that said, this is what 8th graders should know. And it had all, all the rules that they wanted. And I know that's very grammar rule intensive, but that's just kinda how I think. But I like it set out,
Yeah.
I really would like, and I
You're
would like
afraid
to
maybe
see-
teachers won't do it if they don't see it in there?
No, because a teacher that replaced me one time, I talked to her about complex sentences, and she said, oh, yes, we do difficult sentences.
Well, frankly, the
I
problem
don't
there
think
is
we
the
fix
teacher
that.
doesn't know
No,
grammar.
and if it's
So-
there, I would like it to be very specific on sentences, like 3 compounds and 2 complex, or even 3 complex, and put subordinating conjunctions in there, and put simple conjunctions. I really think that's what needs to happen, because those 8th graders need a tool case that's full to go into high school.
Yeah, I just didn't see us not doing that.
Well, and
I
I
could have
think-
anticipated that we would do that.
Wouldn't those be in the standards as opposed to?
They'd be in the
Yeah.
writing standard primarily.
But I think to Nanette's point, right, the question is just, do you have it as a standalone strand, or do you
Right.
embed those standards as part of like the writing category?
Well, do we?
And I think that for me, and maybe I'm misinterpreting this, but when you're talking about embedding it, I think about how we in our district teach it, and I think for me, that's kind of crossing the line over into curriculum. Like if you are putting it in writing and you're handing people a document with it in writing, I just, with all that we've been hearing with Common Core not, crossing into curriculum, I just think we need to be careful so that we're not accused of doing the same thing. And I think if we had a separate language strand versus embedding it, that would kind of cover that, I don't know, unless I'm thinking about what your intent is.
I don't think
So-
it'll get enough attention.
Okay, so that makes it, that's a really good point. My thought about taking it and putting it in writing as well as in reading was that, so that the connection between both was clear. So that it's not just this thing that stands alone, but that you have to use those pieces when you're reading, and you also need to use them when you're writing, and so that you can see the connection in both. I almost saw them as being almost redundant in both places, like I see it in my reading and then I see it in my writing standards, but it's the same thing.
Right.
But so that it's very clear that when we're looking at complex sentences or compound complex sentences, those kinds of things are happening in our reading, so that we are noticing how authors use them. Kind of what we said is that approaching the text as a writer piece, and then also in writing as in, now I'm a writer, now I use it as a writer. So that was
So-
kind of how I was looking at it.
Danette, and Danette, I'm okay with either way,
Yeah.
frankly.
Okay.
But, and
Well-
I totally appreciate your point about if it's not in there by itself, it may not be stressed as
Well,
much,
I
but.
ran it by some other people, and they were like, what?
Yeah. Well,
Oh my gosh, you can't have
thinking
that.
about your example though, of the compound sentences, the complex sentences, as Carrie said, I was imaging the way to address that, because sometimes that is not addressed in reading, so that if we put it in both places, that would be the perfect example of something that would go into reading. You might have a question for your students, for example, about why a complex sentence was used by the writer here.
Right.
Rather than a
And that's,
simple
right,
sentence.
that's another thing that I would like to see is, besides just the standard, analyzing sentences
Mhm.
from classic writers
Mhm.
and from
Mhm.
good writers, and.
So that was my
modeling.
thought about embedding it in both places.
Right. Well, I made a list of things that I thought should live in grammar language land,
Mhm.
and things that should be somewhere, propaganda, where is that exactly? Should it be anywhere? And then things that I thought should not exist anywhere, like transitive and intransitive verbs, I'm sorry, gerunds. They just don't need to live anywhere. Infinitives. Does anybody, I don't know, maybe
Can
I'm.
I say something as, in my perspective, I have a daughter who's a junior, who's ranked first in her class of about over 300. And for the first time ever, she took a grammar class as a sophomore. so weak in that area, and we've been implementing Common Core, you know, in my district for the last 4 years. So for her to recognize the need, and in her writing is where she's been so lax. I mean, her writing has not been, I mean, she's taken all higher level, I mean, she's been pushed ahead of grade, and so she's gotten plenty of what she needs. But as, you know, in this conversation, the language piece is where, as intelligent as she is, she's missing. So I know if she's missing, and there was just a specific grammar, and it was an elective course. So she took it as her elective in high school, and absolutely loved it. But she realized, she goes, Mom, I know nothing. I know nothing. And so it's from her lips to God's ears. I mean, that's where she is, and for her to be able to articulate that, I really appreciate what you're saying, is that she didn't get that piece earlier.
So you wanna add back in the strand that's in the Common Core,
But I
but
just
not in
think the
ours.
language piece to it, the grammar piece, I mean, to assume that, from what I'm hearing, and I wanna understand what you're saying, is that you were talking about just embedding it into the reading. I think it needs to
Well,
be
and writing,
Right.
mainly
But the
writing and
assumption may
speaking.
be-
Well, how it gets embedded is use a variety of sentence structures.
But when
That's
she
it.
sat down with
Well, that's
you-
not, yeah, that's not how I envision it.
No,
Keep
but
going.
again,
I don't like it like that.
No.
I want it different
Yeah.
than that.
But what she recognized though, when she took a specific grammar class in her elective course, just how really lax, I mean, she does not have a basis of knowledge. And so, and I can't speak your language, you know, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but somehow we're missing that point. I mean, I come from a really top-notch school, and she's the top of the top, and she feels she can articulate, she knows what she's not gotten. So for her to be able to articulate that to me, once she gets that piece, that it was an elective that she took. And a lot of our kids are being pushed into that elective, especially the higher level, because they don't get it. And so that's such an important thing, I think we need to have that conversation.
And usually your higher level students are encouraged to take a class like that because they're ready to understand how the language works.
But I think the
And-
problem is they're not getting it, and like you say, 6, 7, and 8.
They can get a lot of it by 8.
Absolutely. So.
Get an extra.
I had an interesting conversation with a friend of mine who's in another group, and on your point, you know, he said it's a little tangential to getting to the core strand, but on your point, what he said was, you know, we look at everything through the prism of what are the end skills that you're going to get.
Yes.
So we're not looking at writing standards so that, and you know, and all the teachers in the room, please correct me if I'm wrong, but we're not looking at standards for, you know, this is what we have to do. We're looking at it for the end. What does this accomplish? And I think that's what you're saying, and I'm not sure how that applies to what you want us to do.
Well, and I think everybody in the room, and correct me if I'm misspeaking here, I think everybody in the room agrees we need explicit grammar standards.
Yeah.
I think the question is just, should that be a
Right.
cluster under writing, or should it be its own strand? And I personally don't care one way or the other.
I'd like to see a strand. I love that South Carolina thing, you know.
You wanna make a motion then, and we can vote on it?
Okay, well, wait a minute,
All right,
because
I'm
my
gonna-
one
okay.
other comment is,
Sure.
regarding that, I brought up a few minutes ago that the way that strand is in our current Missouri Learning Standards, i.e. the Common Core, is that the separate language strand has the grammar conventions in it, and it also has vocabulary.
Oh, okay.
So are you suggesting bringing those both back and putting them into one strand, or having this strand be just the grammar conventions? That's my question. Because obviously vocabulary can be embedded in the others as well, just
Right.
like the grammar and conventions can. So I just wondered which one you want us to do.
Are you talking about vocabulary as in learning vocabulary?
Well,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm curious about what do you mean by
Just
that, Mary Ellen?
acquiring.
Right. Vocabulary acquisition, both productive and receptive vocabulary.
But it's also the vocabulary usage, because they should be using it in speaking also.
Yeah,
So
so
we
that's
can't
why I mean by
speaking.
productive.
I think
Yeah.
we can
Yeah.
clarify.
Productive in speaking and writing.
In the
Yes.
existing Missouri standards right now, there is a language strand that has explicit grammar standards, and then it also has explicit like vocabulary acquisition standards. That's all Mary Bell is saying. That it exists right now, we were moving away from that, but if we move that back, that's, I mean, again, I truly.
It's okay to put it
care.
back, I mean, it's in the standards we have right now, and I'm not opposed to putting it back in if you guys want it. I'm just saying, what's it gonna contain? Is it gonna contain just the grammar conventions, or also the vocabulary?
I think if you put put the grammar in, you also need to put the vocabulary in. That would be my thought. Using the,
And your thought is, that is because
Of the
that it
use of-
invites, going back to what Elizabeth said, thinking with the end in mind.
Right.
It emphasizes vocabulary acquisition for the student.
and it also emphasizes, using the varied content, words and the domain-specific words
Right.
and.
Yeah, so add a little specificity, like some of the vocabulary standards are like, students should be able to use Greek and Latin roots to help them understand what a word means, or
Right.
students should be able to use context clues to help them
I know.
understand what
And
a word
students
means.
should be able to
I-
use
yeah,
words
but what I
as
don't
they
like
pertain
about
to
that
the
is you don't
specific
know
audience of what
To
topic.
what degree?
Yeah,
What do you
I
mean?
know.
Right,
Right.
I agree.
I'm
I'm
responsible
not-
for
I'm
all
not-
that.
But
I'm not
that's
crazy about
critical.
it, but-
Well, I know, but it's hard to know, especially if you know that you'll be assessed on standards. You know, to what degree should I know them in seventh grade versus eighth grade?
Yeah. Well, should speakers of speech live there in language? I mean, I don't think so. It should be.
But like, roots you're getting.
It's mostly grammar.
Complexity as you get older.
It's more grammar than, I mean,
It's very specific.
yes, very. And I don't like their standards at all. I don't like how they've done the noun, verb. It's very explainable, but I just like the setup of it. By eighth grade, these skills should.
Would you read a few, just so we all have an idea, Lindsay? Good job.
Well, sure.
Okay, and to go back to Stacy's question, I'm looking at the current one, Stacy, and what it says, with the 6 through 12 is, things like determine, the meaning of unknown words in context, which we already have in the reading one, but,
Right.
you know, that's what I'm saying, some of it's already
It's
better.
a crossover.
Yeah, determine the, what, language is used figuratively means, and then also actually memorizing new words. Pick words that would appear frequently in, at the academic, tier
Right.
2 words. Tier 1 words are spoken,
think
tier
that would
2
be
is
language,
academic,
maybe.
tier, well, it is in the current document, and I'm ready
Right.
to leave it, it was just a
Right.
question I had. Where
Well,
do you want it?
I have a list of like things I really would have to have, must-haves in grammar, and then questions that I had, where should this live? Thesis,
Mhm.
citation, plagiarism, where should, you know.
I personally think those should be under
Writing.
writing.
Right.
Well, I
Research
kind of
and
do
writing.
too, and that's why I sort of put them in the middle section. But here's some things I've got, and I don't know, I'm Miss Grammar, you just, that's my thing. 3 compound sentence types, complex sentence, independent and dependent clauses, you can't do that without those two. Sentence building, and I would like reading and analyzing the sentence structure of well-known authors with, this might be with guidance.
I have a question. So, like, when I was in 6th grade, I mean, my vocabulary was formed. I read everything, so I would mispronounce words because I read them and then I said them. So, you know, how much vocabulary has to be learned in 6 through 12? How much is it gained through the other parts of it? I mean, is it something we have to
Yeah.
pull
Lot.
out?
Read them.
Yes.
You read a lot, and your
And you
vocabulary
read good stuff.
Right.
is astronomical, right?
Right.
So then, aren't we getting to it with the reading?
Right.
Doesn't
That's
have
what
to-
I said
Yeah,
last
I think it
time.
could go either way.
What I'm wondering is do we work through those other, strands that we've already identified and see how much we actually end up putting in there? And then go back to the things that you were like, these are the must-haves that I have identified, and see how, like, if they aren't there, and then, or after we look at it all, say, how comfortable are we with the way we have it, and then do we wanna pull it out? You know, the other thing that I'm thinking of right now is that I don't even know that, like, triple redundancy isn't a bad thing, like, you know, like, oh, look at that, it's in the reading, oh, look at that, it's in the writing, oh, look at that, there, it's in the language. I don't know, it's, you know, it may not be, it may be too redundant, but I think that it's good to see, I think that one of the things that it does for us is what you just said, it doesn't so much of your vocabulary, acquisition come from reading, like it does. But then when we pull it out, it makes it feel like it's something that we better be like doing some drill and kill on, as opposed to acquiring it through our reading.
Word study, like you were talking about last time, where does that live?
Yeah.
Well, and that's why, like, I
Right.
view a language strand as having your conventions and mechanics over here, and then your vocabulary over here, from, it's your comm arts block, you know, and it's all integrated and embedded all day, every day, all day long. But I think for purposes of saying, here's what you need to know and be able to do, I feel it needs to be broken out for clarity and so that it doesn't get missed, so that it doesn't
Maybe
have
that's the
less.
key word, so it doesn't get missed.
Well,
Yeah.
my
What is it?
fear is still that it will be taught in isolation. And
But that's
we know.
curriculum, I mean, that's still a.
That's how my daughter got it though, with grammar. I mean, that's how all of her bells went off, was it was taught in isolation.
Right, as a separate strand.
Well, I mean, again, it's not a class for all kids, it was a class that was an elective class. But for her, that was so absent from anything she'd ever gotten before, that when it was taught to her in isolation, she felt she could focus and it made her, and they were told literally, if you wanna perform well on the ACT, for those of you kids who, you need this class because basically you've not gotten this. So why are we not making that grammar piece such a big part? Because all of the kids that are really trying to get, you know, their high ACT scores, they're being pushed into this elective that's not for, you know, that's not for everyone. Well, we should be focusing on, I think, grammar for everyone.
Right, what I think what Mary Della asked you is that the way, what you're saying is that your daughter didn't get what she needed to have through the current Missouri Learning Standards.
I don't know, I didn't really say that. I mean, here's my issue, whatever is happening, because I'm not in the classroom every day, I'm not with her teachers, so I'm not saying that. I am saying somehow, whether, like Casey said, it's getting missed, it's already there, but it's getting missed because it's just part of a bigger list. I think it has to be more of a priority, because just to your point, she reads 4 books a week. And she's constantly like mispronouncing a word. I'm like, wait, what did you just say? And I'll repronounce it for her, but she can use it in context. She just pronounces it wrong. You know, so I get that piece to it. But I'm just saying that why are we pushing all these kids as an elective into a grammar course because they've never really gotten
Yeah,
it before?
that seems like a curricular district level issue.
Well, I mean, but
what Mary
we're
Della,
honored with distinction. I mean, we're one of the top districts in the state.
I'm not saying that you're not, if I can finish, what Mary Della was saying
Go right ahead.
is that the way that the current standards are now, it is separated. It is its own strand. So we said last time that we wanted to integrate it so that, like you said, it was more of a common, everyday, let's see it in writing, let's see it in reading.
And in speaking.
But, right, and in speaking.
In speaking.
For the third.
Yes,
Yeah.
sorry,
Only
Janet.
second.
But now you want to keep it
Feel
as it
passionate
is
about, Janet.
in the Common Core as a separate strand.
We're not seeing it translated, obviously. I mean, as it is,
Well, like
it's
Carrie
not
said,
translated
why
that
couldn't
way.
we do both?
Right.
I mean, seriously, why couldn't we do both?
Well, then I guess when I think about how it's.
That's not a bad idea.
If we're gonna think about the almighty test, which is not really where I'd like to go, but like just for, I mean, we're talking about ACT and whatever else. When I think about that, typically, grammar and, vocabulary are embedded in something that they've been reading or, well, it's usually part of the passage they've been reading and then it's asking them to do something with it. So it seems like it would make sense that it would fall under there. I don't know, I really,
Well,
I honestly don't
go back to
care, I
what you
guess.
said earlier, which is maybe if we work through the rest of
Yeah.
them and see how it's embedded, then we can decide whether something is left out and we need that separate strand.
We can decide if it needs to be
Which
changed.
they obviously decided that when they created the Common Core, and I'm not against the Common Core, I'm just saying I can see it like you either way.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate what you're saying because I do think that we are missing, the way that we wrote it is that students will identify and analyze tone, word choice, and syntax. But perhaps what we need to revise it to say is something more similar to understand how language functions in different contexts, to make effective choices for meaning or style or to comprehend more fully when reading or listening. And that, if we could have a strand or a objective like that, that could go in multiple categories, because that's what you are talking about, and Mary Della is really evaluating that language and understanding how it functions in
It's
poetry
being
versus drama
metacognitive
versus,
about
right.
language, and I'm almost positive that's the reason they made a separate strand when they created the Common Core.
Yeah.
Because their thought was language consists of 2 things, words and a grammar that allows them to make sense. So we're gonna do the vocabulary part, we're gonna do the grammar part, this is gonna be our language strand. Theoretically, I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, but I also can see that students won't be able to do that if they don't have a strong grammar background.
Right, and six
For
through
sure.
eight, you have to teach a few things in isolation. You can't, they just don't appear.
Well, you do it
You
common
know.
grade too, so
Yeah.
I get it.
Yep. For
It
sure.
doesn't fall down out of the sky and hit you.
Yeah.
You know, my daughter, I didn't realize until she was in high school, she did not know what a complex sentence was. Couldn't tell you for.
Can I throw a crazy
That's a
idea?
great
Could we, since we're talking writing anyway, maybe let's table nonfiction for a minute and just jump to the writing strand, and let's start with language as a cluster. And if we decide it needs to not be a cluster and be a strand, that'd be great.
I would like to, before we go on, I would like to go to one of our guests, who is Dr. Sandra Stotsky. He's here, who wrote the Massachusetts Standards, and I would like to ask her opinion.
Thank you. Is it okay for me to speak to the group?
I really don't know how that's supposed to work. I mean, we're the work group,
That's not
so I.
supposed to-
Sure, I'm
Yeah.
asking a guest a question, so go ahead.
Um,
It's allowed.
No, no, that's not the way, that's not the way the, legislation reads.
Yes, it does right here. It says the work that has been done by other states recognized regional, national experts, professional education discipline based on, and professional education. She's a national expert. She is a national
I would
expert.
like to move that only work group members participate in the discussion.
Well, that's already in the bill, so that.
Well, I'm asking,
I made
as
a
a work
motion.
group, I'm asking her a question, and I'd like.
It's
We have a
authorized in
motion
the
on-
bill.
Yeah, Cass.
In
If
one
the bill says
sixty-five
something,
point
you
two
can't
six.
change the
Yeah,
bill.
so she's an expert, so I would like to ask her opinion.
I'll speak very briefly, because I don't really want to get in the middle of the question of what's in a bill or not. And I've also reviewed all states' standards 3 times over. Most states have a separate strand for vocabulary and a separate strand for grammar, because they're talking about standards, not curriculum or pedagogy. If you're talking about pedagogy, then you decide whether you want to integrate or not integrate. If you're talking about interdisciplinary, you can talk about how you're gonna integrate. But the function of separate strands, as in Common Core and in most documents you will see, was to make sure that it was called to the teacher's attention. That some attention has to be paid to grammar, some attention has to be paid to vocabulary. It's an attention focusing device. How it gets attention paid will depend upon the pedagogy you wanna use. And that would be a matter of choice or direction or however pedagogy gets mandated. But the fact that attention must be paid then shows up on a test, because you have separate questions on a test that will get at vocabulary understanding and grammatical knowledge. And so, at some point, it's gotta be dealt with. How you deal with it is pedagogy. The fact that it must be dealt with is because it's a standard. And you don't have to spend time worrying about pedagogy if your focus or task is to look at standards. Leave the pedagogy for another time.
Which I think is what we've been saying, so we just need to make a decision on how you wanna
Someone can make a
proceed with,
motion that we add
with
a
the language.
string.
I make a motion that we add a language stream.
My second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to add the language strand to the 4 that we have.
Was Danette the second?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other
All the-
conversation?
yeah.
A language strand that's going to have both grammar and vocabulary, or is that
I would say we'll flesh it out when we get to it, just like we've been brainstorming the other ones.
Yeah, but how you vote might depend on
That's fair.
that.
Right.
That's fair.
Vote
Okay.
separately.
So, more conversation.
Which,
Does it
so Jill,
include-
which strand, did you, okay, what are you including in the language strand?
Well, I kinda like what Nick just said, and that's actually what I was thinking, if we kind of talked it through, because it's clear that if we come up with one set thing right now, we're all gonna argue about it, and we just need to walk through it. I think vocabulary, I think grammar, as Casey was saying, conventions, yes.
Okay, so that's what you had in mind, was vocabulary and grammar, okay, and conventions. So, and is that what you would support with your second?
Yes.
I just wanna make sure that we're,
Alright.
that you're not like, well, actually, I'm gonna take that, okay,
Alright,
okay.
Another possible suggestion. All right, there's also the possibility of, instead of making it a separate strand by itself, that underneath each one of those strands, you make it a separate cluster. So, for example, like, is that the cluster on, what?
That's reading,
Okay,
literary.
okay. So underneath that cluster, right there, you have vocabulary and, language, you know? So you could also, that way it's more integrated.
As it pertains to each.
Yes,
strand.
it's more integrated. That way you're not just saying, uh-oh, my time for this big strand. So if, under each one of those clusters, under each one of those strands, you include a cluster, language and vocabulary, and that way it's more integrated.
Should we begin writing it, just identifying those things that we think are super important, and then decide where to put it, whether it is in a new strand, which I'm not against at all. I mean, it does not matter to me at all, but I just think that perhaps we're putting the cart before the horse, that we need to identify some of those things that we want to make sure are in the standards, and then we can decide where they live.
Well,
Well, we
just-
kinda decided that the other day, when last time we met, you know, we kinda made a shopping list, if you will. And then we decided that we would go back and start plugging it in when we thought it fit.
Yeah, I just think Danette has some additional things that she wants to make sure are there. And she hasn't, I mean, you just
In
kind
the
of.
language.
Right.
Well, we didn't talk about language specifically,
Right.
so, I don't know.
So we've got a motion.
I think it's fine to vote right now on that, and at the point we get to that one, which would be at the end, after these others, if we find that it's superfluous, because it's already been covered everywhere else, and that we don't wanna emphasize it in this particular way by isolating it, then we can make that decision at that point. So I'm willing to vote for it.
Could we make a list of must-haves and go ahead and, it's make sure that we cover them somewhere, you know? I mean, if we have our must-haves, like your must-have, and we put them up on the board, and we go ahead and we flesh the rest of it out, and make sure that we hit those.
And that's what we've been trying to do, but just
Right.
cluster by cluster, so I mean,
Yeah.
I think your average teacher is going to look and say, where is the language? You know, where is
Standalone.
But it really
the
should be.
standard?
Okay.
I really do. I mean, I talked to our EMS lady, and she said the same thing. She said, you know, teachers everywhere are screaming, where is grammar? You know, we need it. And I just think it needs to live alone on its own
Well,
strand.
the scary part
And
is if it lives
put it
alone,
in.
sometimes it's taught alone.
Well, it
That's
has to be
the scary
taught
part.
every once in a while alone.
Absolutely.
It
It
does,
just has
but
to in
eventually it
sixth
has to be
grade.
put
You know,
into context.
I get the kids, I teach reading, and so they come to me already behind, and so for me, I really see the damage that's done, because now I have to go back and I have to explicitly, directly reteach some of these. So before they can even write a complete sentence, they need to know the subject, predicate, because when I'm instructing them on what makes a complete sentence, then if you're talking about verbs and they look at you and say, I don't know what that is.
Right.
So I find myself having to keep going back to that point where they lost their instruction, that point of what they learned last in order to rebuild that, so that now they can become successful in writing and
And
not
it's-
write fragments, or make sure they have that subject-verb agreement. But it's really difficult if they don't know what a verb is.
Absolutely, and there's seniors that don't know that, to be quite honest.
Right.
And if
That's
they,
what I mean.
if they know
Yeah.
that
You
a
have to
prepositional
split it
phrase,
into
you know, you're not
Right.
going to find your subject or your verb 99.9% of the time in either one of them. That's something I hit, because I'll have kids that will constantly want to pick out the object of the prepositional phrase as the subject.
That's why it's on the ACT test.
Well, let's be
Okay,
honest.
we have a motion, we have a second, do we wanna vote, or do you want any more conversation?
I have one more little thing to add here that could be relevant, I don't know if it is, but do you remember last time, one of the 2 days, we talked about, there was a vote taken to use the show me standards as our base? I will point out that standard number 1 is speaking and writing standard English, so we did have it as a distinct standard with the show me standards. It is a distinct separate standard with the Common Core, so they totally agree on that. I just thought I'd throw that information out. Yeah.
Are we ready for a vote?
let's vote.
Cause I feel like we're gonna keep saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Call for a vote, call for a vote. There's a little.
So, the motion is to add language as a separate strand that will include vocabulary and grammar and conventions, correct? Okay, so all those in favor of adding language as a separate strand, please signify by raising your hand. You wanna take down names on it? Do we wanna take that?
Unanimous.
Unanimous.
It's unanimous.
Okay, good.
Yep, all in attendance. Okay, I'm gonna add that to our list.
Well, now I can sleep at night.
Which is good, you're sleeping on the
All
couch.
right.
That's gonna be what it is for the
Right.
Well, I would
You know
think of
what
that, and I
it's
would be like, ooh, let's not say that.
You could drive forward.
Okay. Since we have a natural break in the conversation for a moment, I need to, hold on, I need to write and then talk. You know how I am. Okay. Since we have a natural break, in the conversation, housekeeping item of lunch. It's 5 minutes to 11. It goes so fast when we start at 10. So we're at 10.
Yeah, really.
So, but I wanna feel you out for when you want to,
What's the lunch crunch
eat.
again?
The lunch, crowd, like, I feel like it's like a little before noon, like 10 to noon.
How long do they stay?
Seems to be, I don't know how long they
Since
stay.
we have a long afternoon.
Do you know how long?
I think they serve lunch until 1. Like, I think they actually serve lunch, like they're in the little buffet.
Okay.
area.
Well,
that's true.
I think they start at 11, I believe.
Uh-huh.
And
Oh,
your,
okay.
and your state office workers are typically supposed to be dismissed at noon.
Right, so, yeah, and I've kinda noticed when we got down there a little closer to noon, it was busier.
11:45.
So, I wanna be able to, you know, make sure that we break in time for everyone to get food, take care of your needs, and then,
Can we turn the band back on, or is something?
I can, the problem is it blows everybody away over here.
Pony it.
And then it will not, oscillate, it just makes noise. It just goes click, click, click. But we don't wanna leave the door open because there's people out there working,
Can we
so
put
that's
it,
what we gotta do.
will it work, will it point in the middle, like down the aisle? I
I'll
don't know.
ponytail it and then it.
I would throw out like 11:45, just to put this on the time.
Say that again?
11:45,
Give us now.
get us done before.
Well, no, oh, yeah, no.
Unless there's full workstation.
Ooh. You always bust out the best for us.
I know it's warm, but can I ask you to close the door? Just because I don't wanna disturb the people who are working in, I mean, they're not,
Can they turn the air down then? Can you ask someone somewhere else?
they can't, it's
They can't.
controlled.
It's controlled.
It's controlled.
No more big.
I'll open this door just a little bit, but they're not closed.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, that's good.
You angled it.
Give a little
That's
bit of
science.
ventilation.
You're a good leader.
How's that?
Well done.
Cause I can write on chart paper and turn on fan. Thanks. Okay, so did we say 11:45? I heard one person say that. Is that what we would like to do, 11:45?
Here, can I ask just one quick question? Just, as we're looking at Massachusetts and we have the author, can we just ask one more question for while she's here? Can you, Dr. Stotsky, would you address the strands that are listed for us? Are we on the right track compared to?
Yeah, see, this group decides what's on the right track.
Right, but we
That's-
would just like to know for some of us, just like to hear her opinion. We
Well,
just
I
follow
believe
opinion.
you're speaking later on this afternoon, right? Are you not speaking? You're out.
But I don't know that I'm speaking to all.
Well, that's okay. If they're interested, they can.
Well, I'm interested in hearing her. so
Right, but I'm saying that,
Yeah.
like for this group,
What's the
we make
threat?
those decisions.
What's the
There's
threat?
not.
I'm interested
There's
in
not.
hearing her.
That's okay.
And she's here, I guess, and I'd like to hear her.
That's, and I
thoughts.
understand what you're, I understand that completely.
Yeah, so
But-
I'm a part of the group too.
Well,
and
I-
I would like for her to speak.
Vote.
No, there's not a vote.
Well,
In the
you're-
House bill, it
We said in
states,
our rules
in the
that we
House
vote.
bill, it states that we can consult
I understand what you're saying.
experts,
There's-
and she's here.
Yes.
I would like to hear her
Okay.
speak for a second.
Okay, but there are other members of the group also.
Right,
So,
and so if they would like to have someone else speak at some point, that's fine with me too, but I'd like to hear her speak.
okay, again, like I said, first of all, I'm gonna go back, we do have a motion on the table that we vote on that. Number two is, I do know you're speaking elsewhere, so you're welcome to listen to her or ask her opinion outside of here, so let's just take a vote. Or let's see if there's a second. There's a motion on the table to vote to allow outside input into our discussion. Is there a second or no?
One second.
What was the motion?
Who said?
Wait,
To not allow
I
outside
thought you
input.
said to
I'm sorry,
allow.
I did, I misspoke, I apologize.
Was there a
misspoke.
second? I'm sorry.
I did not hear one, so there's a motion to not allow visitor input into the conversation, into the work group conversation. Is there a second or no?
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a second.
Just to speak to the motion, I acknowledge that there are experts who are probably going to show up maybe every meeting. And if we allow all of the experts to speak, when are we going to get our work done? All of us have access to her information online and a variety of other places. And so at lunch, maybe you could speak to her, or in future meetings, the same thing would be true. We have access to all of that information other places, and so we can do our homework and be prepared. And if any of us want to present the information that perhaps she would have presented or other experts would have presented, we can get ready ahead of time. We can present that information as a member of the group, and all of us then will have the opportunity to hear that. So that's why I.
Hearing it on video and having her speak of something that is not actually going on in this group is a little bit different than actually having her in the room and having her speak to what we're speaking about and what she sees right here. Because on video, she's not speaking about things that are in this group. I don't understand what the, I don't know if some of you all are you, is she going to step on toes with something that she has to say? I don't understand why we then.
It's just, we have the Massachusetts standards here, which we are giving some deference to. We've got the author of the Massachusetts standards sitting right behind us. Does
It's
that
a
not
time
matter?
issue for today and in the future. It's a
Right.
time issue.
I just fully say that, I mean, I think that we have experts, we should be open-minded and have them speak for a few minutes. I could hear experts on any side, it informs me, I don't feel biased, I feel informed. I don't think they should be have unlimited time, I agree with you, Anne, we have a lot of work to do, but I mean, if there's an expert who's written standards that's here that wants to give us a couple minutes on point of view, I'm honored by that, I think that's great. I'm informed by that as I'm informed by everybody.
I think she deserves a little bit of respect for her being an expert in her field.
Well,
I think that.
As do we, we're experts in our field as well.
Sure.
And so I
You're all
feel like
right.
if she's an expert, absolutely, utmost respect. All of these guys are probably experts in something as well. So if we're going to pay homage to her expertise, then perhaps we should pay, you know what I mean? Like, it's just a whirlwind of everybody gets to speak whenever they want to all the time, and I'm not sure that that is our
I
intent.
don't know, just for a little clarification, I mean, I don't see any harm in a couple of minutes. I mean, in all honesty, everybody here knows that Dr. Skotsky was asked to be on the validation committee for Common Core, so at some point, the writers of Common Core sought her out for her expertise. She's sitting here right now, and I think, just like Liz said, I mean, it can't hurt, and I'm not saying nobody else can ever speak again. I mean, I don't think any of these people here necessarily are saying, hey, I've written standards and I wanna talk. I don't know that for sure, but I don't know, I just think a couple minutes can't hurt.
The only thing I see is that if we keep it where it's just the group, we are not tainted by any outside influences. I mean, we didn't have somebody come in beforehand and talk to us about, yes, you need Common Core before we voted. And, you know, we didn't have an expert speaker on that. And, you know, I wouldn't mind hearing it later,
There was a
but-
PowerPoint by Desi when you walked into the room about Common Core the first day, was there not?
Well, I think we killed that.
Yeah, and I think what's frustrating about that though, Stacy, is that, we heard a lot, and I think that was valid, right? We heard a lot of criticism the very first meeting for 2 hours about how outside forces shouldn't be coming in telling us how to do our work, and yet we've been interrupted now by about 8 times. We've had the lieutenant governor in, we've had Representative Barr's rep in, we've had about 8 different people. Now, I agree with Casey and Elizabeth, I am not at all opposed to letting you speak for 3 minutes.
I don't think that Barr and the lieutenant governor are outside forces when they are the lieutenant governor of the state of Missouri and Barr is the, sponsor of the bill.
Yeah, but none of them are on the
I don't think you
committee.
can classify them as outside
The
forces.
thing is, the
Oh,
law
they're not
says, this is what
committee
the law
members.
says, is that it talks about the work that has been done by other states, recognized regional and national experts. That's what she is, a national expert.
If you just let me, what I was saying is, I am not opposed at all today. She's here, we haven't addressed this issue before, for 3 minutes if we wanna let her speak. But I do think moving forward, if we're gonna have outside speakers come to our meeting, we need to set that up in the agenda before the next
Yes.
meeting, and we need to all agree to, yes, we want to have X person come and
So
speak
now
for
that's
X number of
starting to
minutes.
sound like these darn local school board meetings, Nick, which drive me crazy.
Well, and
As a
Jill-
parent, I never get to go speak at the stupid school board meeting because they have this 2-minute regulation and I have to get on the agenda weeks in advance. You know, that really impedes the democratic process. I think the parents in Missouri are really sick of being bullied by that process.
Okay, Jana, what would you say?
You know, I could bring an expert next time too.
Sure.
And then next time, you could bring an expert. And then next time, you could bring an expert. You know, we have to be given credit. We are all experts at this table. And you know, if I wanna hear what she has to say, I would carry on a conversation with her on my time, and I would bring back her ideas, and I would say, hey guys, I heard some wonderful ideas, and I'd like to share those ideas with you.
Or even email them to us, like in the
Yes.
off season. What I think what's
Right.
frustrating is that
Wonderful
we are
ideas.
giving up our own personal vacation time. We're giving up our own money to be
Yes.
here, and we keep getting interrupted.
Yes.
Every single meeting,
Yes.
we've been interrupted by at least an hour's worth of distraction from the
Well,
work we're trying
yes.
to
You
do.
know,
And that, to me,
honestly,
that's what's personally frustrating.
Well, it's frustrating to me that when I don't even feel like I have a voice. You know, if
I
I'm
do have a voice.
Listen, let me finish. Every time we try to, you know, there's clearly a line of demarcation among our work group here, clearly. And every time the people that want to represent the parents, and I'm a parent too, and I share a lot of their same concerns. I'm also a teacher, and so I share the concerns on the teacher side as well. Every time something gets brought up, somebody makes a motion, and somebody seconds that motion, and we're shut down. So it's kind of like, what's the point?
Weren't you the one speaking to the democratic process? Isn't that what that is?
But the point is, it's stacked against us.
So you want the democratic process as long as it works in your favor?
No, I want the democratic process.
You mean,
That's what this is. You make a motion.
Let me tell you what I want. As a parent with 3 small school-aged children, let me tell you what I want. I want us, first of all, to respect this law. And it doesn't matter if we're for or against Common Core, again, it doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
Because we need to do what's in this law, and that is to develop new standards. And if we have an expert who has developed the #1 set of standards in the United States, and we're sitting here having an argument of we don't wanna speak to her, to me as a parent in Missouri, that is mind-boggling.
Well, to me, as
That-
a parent
that-
in Missouri,
that-
I wanna move on
But
to
your
February.
child isn't she a senior?
She is.
Okay, so
And
she's not going to be affected by any of this, because she's gonna be out of school. See, my kids are. They're going to go through this crap. And I want good standards for my children.
Absolutely. So
I
why?
don't
So
want
let's get busy.
political crap involved
neither.
with my kids, okay? And if we have a national expert in here who's written the #1 standards for my kids and for every kid in Missouri, I want her input.
Are you gonna?
And I'm not talking about the political crap that's going on with some people wanting to keep Common Core and bring it in here. I'm tired of that crap as a parent, to tell you the truth.
I'm not sure why you're screaming at me, Heather.
Because I am mad, because as a parent in Missouri with 3 school-aged children, I'm tired of it.
Okay.
Because my kids are going to be affected by what goes on in here and every other work group that is set up through this bill. And I want it to be true, and I want it to be honest, and I want good things to happen. And when we have agendas being run in here of people wanting to keep Common Core, it's not happening.
Okay,
We're
not. Okay.
No, it is
Okay,
being
okay.
run.
All
I
right,
don't know why
all
you're
right.
screaming at me.
Okay.
I'm not screaming at you,
You
I'm
are.
talking to everyone, because I've had it as a
Okay.
parent.
I feel like.
You're screaming at everyone then.
I-
And I don't
And
think
I
that that's
am, but
respectful.
I've had it.
Okay.
So if you're gonna go, if, you are speaking today, am I correct? Somewhere over at the Capitol building, that is word on the street, is that happening? From 12 to 1. So are you going to go listen to her speak from 12 to 1?
Of course I am.
Great, fantastic, so then.
But she's
let's-
not gonna speak about what's going on in this work group.
But she could,
And
right? You could go out in the hall right now, you could
And
ask
she
the
did.
same question, she could tell you the
And
answer,
we've
and you
wasted
could come
10
back and
minutes
listen.
of debating this, when
Okay.
she has already
It's
been
amazing.
speaking.
Okay, ladies and
Two to
gentlemen.
3 minutes is all we're asking.
Okay,
Oh,
so
I agree.
I'm gonna go back to,
2 to 3 minutes.
I'm gonna go back to, we have
Not a speech.
We have a motion.
But we've already
Folks.
wasted 20 minutes out of this.
We have a motion on the table, it has been seconded, we've had lots of conversation, it's not productive conversation, it's a lot of, yelling back and forth, so I think I think we've had conversation. And so I think what we need to do now is take our vote and move on. So, the motion on the table is to help me, Tori, make sure that I get this right, what I said before, is to, not allow outside, or visitors to engage in the conversation of the work group.
I believe the original motion said that the conversation would be limited
Okay.
to the work
Okay.
groups, that language.
Okay, that's language, I don't
Conversation
really.
would be limited to.
Conversation is limited to the work group, so all in favor of that?
I feel like if we still, and I apologize, because I really wanna move forward, but is this motion then, like henceforth, like we're saying, no one else outside of our committee is
At
going
any
to
point
speak
ever.
unless we make another motion to vote in favor to do that?
I-
I just wanna make sure
I
I'm
feel like
clear on
that's
what we're
what
voting
that would
on.
be.
With the exception of conversing with the K through 5 work group participants, right?
We're up, okay.
Cause they're not in.
Well, they're
Right,
with-
right. Just the vertical articulation, right?
This is a poorly designed motion.
Can I,
Would you read
where
the
did I
motion?
read, am I wrong in reading that they can have comment cards, and if they wrote on comment cards, do we get the comment cards, or where do those comment cards go? So maybe comments could be written on a card, does
That's good.
anybody else read
We
that?
should have, we should have.
Great idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good idea.
That way,
Yes, the original motion.
you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I'm just,
It said.
Only group members be allowed to speak. So that would, so, the original motion was only group members be allowed to speak, that was the original motion.
Right.
And Lindsay seconded it.
Okay.
And I called for a vote.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
so the original motion was only members of the group to be allowed to speak. So we have a second on that motion. I'm gonna ask you, I'm gonna call for the vote now, I'm gonna ask you to vote on that, so only members of the work group be allowed to speak. So all in favor? You don't have comment cards?
Let me get names. Okay, I have Carrie.
Karen.
I have Lindsay Thompson. I have Dale House. Can you help me on?
Janice.
Janice Scott.
And Franklin.
Dan Franklin. Mariella Carter. Is there anyone I missed? Okay.
I wasn't, I didn't count, I'm sorry.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have 7 on the list. Did I miss anyone?
I think comment cards is a great idea. I would love to have those.
Cards.
Yeah.
I'll ask.
Are you gonna call for those?
We had.
Oh, yes, all opposed, I'm sorry, I should do that since it wasn't unanimous. Opposed.
So that would be Elizabeth.
Jill.
If you'd like to write down your reads, I'd be happy to read it.
There's only 13 members though. So the first vote was 6, wasn't it?
No, it was 7.
No, it was 7
We have
to 6.
16 members.
I have 7 to 6. Do you want me, oh, and I didn't get you, Carrie, I'm sorry. Where are you on the last group? The opposed, okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There are 14.
members have to-
It was
There were
7 and 7, yeah, it was 7 and 7.
It was 7 and 7, there are 14.
Carry according to
There's 14
Oh,
on there.
Carrie,
Of the
Carrie,
members,
Carrie.
yeah, 9 members have to be present, of everybody present.
Where's the math group?
So everybody present doesn't, oh, it was 7.
Alright, can I, since that motion didn't carry, can I make a second motion? What I would move is, and this is kind of silly, I would move to allow Sandra Stasky to answer the question for 3 minutes today, and then I would move that, moving forward, we clear all outside speakers ahead of time when we're developing our agenda for the future meeting.
I also wanna make this point, if it's a 7-7 tie, Robert's Rules of Order,
That motion did not carry.
it did not carry,
No,
so
it
we
did
need to
not carry.
acknowledge that.
That's
Right,
I
and so
did.
I'm
Well,
now moving what I
but
just said, and I'll
think
happy to
about-
paraphrase
Think about
again.
this though, I mean, if somebody needed to come over from the other work groups,
That's
we're not
true.
gonna have a 2-week window to let
Right,
that,
but
so I think you need to remove your time frame off of there.
Well, I would still suggest, if someone needs to come over and they need to make an announcement, they could write it on a piece of paper and give it to one of us to announce. I mean, what I'm talking about is like an in-depth discussion on something. I mean, again, if somebody really just has to make a quick announcement, then you can whisper that in my ear and I can make that announcement. I'm talking about something that's gonna be a sustained discussion on something. I think we should clear it as a group ahead of time so that nobody's surprised and so that we're not wasting 15 minutes every time this comes up.
Nick,
And I feel the same for whether it's Dr. Spassky, whether it's David Coleman, I don't care who's coming in, whether it's the lieutenant governor or the governor. Anybody that is going to come to address the group in a substantive way, I feel we need to vote as a group on that ahead of time.
I
Will
think
you
what you're saying
articulate- I'm
is
s-
normal part of, I think what you're saying is normal part of business. I think like what you're saying is an exception will be if there's an emergency reason that we need an outside counseling,
Right.
you know, or this group can't move forward without it, we can vote on an exception. But you're saying normal
Right.
course of business.
Yes.
Would you
Yeah.
articulate and move your motion again so that I can record it?
So it's two
correctly?
parts. Number one, I would move that we allow Senator Statsky 3 minutes today to answer the question at hand.
I got that part.
And then moving forward, immediately after that 3 minutes, that we don't have any more outside speakers coming in and speaking unless we have, as a normal course of business, unless we've cleared it in the agenda for the day before that meeting. Does that make sense?
What does that mean?
So
Cleared
so
it.
at the end of today, right, we're gonna look at our agenda for tomorrow. If
Okay.
we feel that we would like to bring an outside speaker in, we would, as a group, decide that's part of our agenda for tomorrow. And if we didn't do that, then we would not allow an outside speaker to come in and
Okay.
speak that day. Unless, again, it's an emergency, and in which case we would vote as a committee at that time, yes, we wanna break this rule.
Okay.
So just to,
Those are 2 motions.
no outside entities be allowed to speak unless that has been made a part of the agenda prior to the meeting? Nick, is that is that what you intend?
Correct.
Okay. I was just trying to get that concise.
Okay, so really 2 motions.
Yeah, there's 2 motions.
Do you wanna split it, or do you wanna do it together?
Oh, it's a two-part.
It is a two-parter.
It's a motion.
Okay.
Because
So we'll just, that way we don't have to do 2 different votes, we can just
We
vote
just
on
do
the
it
whole
one.
thing. Okay, so you made a motion, you just.
Elizabeth seconded it.
Oh, she did, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Okay, so the motion is to allow Dr. Stotsky 3 minutes to comment on the question, that was posed. And then going forward, we would agree to add any outside speakers to the agenda unless we are unable to proceed otherwise and we need to vote to break our own rule. Is that good enough? I got it? Okay. All right, so all those in favor of that, please signify by raising your hand.
I got Carrie, I got Lindsay, I have Elizabeth, I have Carrie Whisper.
These are combined.
I have Lynette.
It was just one motion we did.
I have Nick, I have Casey,
All of that efficiency.
I have Nick, I have Jenna, I have Ann. That's what I have. Just to verify, I have Carrie Skeeters, Lindsay Thompson, Elizabeth Lauber, Carrie Rissner, Annette House, Casey Rosiski, I know I butchered it. Nick Kramer, Janice Scott, and Ann Franklin. Did I miss anyone? Okay.
All those opposed, signify by raising your hand now.
Listen. Okay.
Okay, so it's 8 to 5. Okay, so that motion does carry.
Somebody did.
No, someone didn't vote?
No, I'm sorry, 9 to 5.
Oh, 9 to 5. 9 to 5, sorry. 9 to 5. So that motion carries. So
Can you rephrase it?
rephrase the question, please.
To
Heather, or
Dr.
I think it was Heather, or
Just
with
the
you?
strands that we're actually addressing at this
Okay.
point, which are displayed. Would you mind just to address the strands that we have?
I have basically 2 questions from the perspective of a member of Common Core's Validation Committee, because They're the questions I raised 6 years ago. I'm looking first at your clusters and asking, where is the rationale for these limited Common Core clusters, because that is what they are there, and I'm just asking what the rationale is for them, because there never has been a rationale for them in the 6 years that I was on the validation committee asking about them. And then when I look at the strands, I'm asking, where is the research base for that 50-50 division between reading literary text and reading nonfiction text, since most English teachers and most literary studies coursework at the college level teaches English by the 4 major genres, which are nonfiction, poetry, drama, and fiction. Those are the 4 major genres that most English literature has been divided into traditionally, historically, going back thousands of years. I mean, I'm not talking about just recently, but by lumping poetry, drama, and fiction into the first one and implying that it's 50% as opposed to 50% for nonfiction, which is only one of the 4 major genres, you are biased against literary, complex literature, which will not be taught the way it should in its full degree, and introducing far more of whatever is called nonfiction into the reading English class, which harms the development of critical thinking. That's less than 3 minutes, maybe.
Well, I have a question, where do you get from that, it's 50-50?
Because you only have 2 things, reading literary text and reading nonfiction. So if reading literature is equal as a strand to reading nonfiction, that's the most problematic feature of Common Core. That's where it comes from.
We had those 2 in the Show Me standards that we're using as the base. Reading and evaluating fiction, reading and evaluating nonfiction. And now we're getting to the curriculum level and the actual instruction, the taught curriculum, not just what's on paper, but the taught curriculum. And that's not our job.
I don't see 50-50.
Yeah.
No,
We had
that's
both
not
of,
our
these
job.
are both not only in the Common Core standards, but they are in the 7 Show Me standards for communication.
Then that may have been a problem with the Show Me standards, and I'm not talking about your past standards. I'm talking about what literary scholarship is all about. And that is where I go academically. What do literary scholars deal with? And they deal with 4 major genres. And if you are concerned about the development of critical thinking, you want to have far more complex literary text taught than will come out through what seems to be a 50-50 division between literary text and nonfiction. Nonfiction is only one of 4 genres. That's all I'm trying to say.
How
And
would
it's
it
based
look,
on
though?
literary scholarship.
I'm genuinely interested, how would it look?
You would have reading poetry, reading drama, reading fiction, reading nonfiction, as in the Massachusetts standards, for which we received literary scholars' advice. Because every one of our standards had the advice of higher ed experts to make sure that our basic structure was sound and what represented what normally English teachers in high school had as training, and I suspect in Missouri,
So
the
there would be
English
more
teachers have the same
strands
training. You
than
would have
what we have.
Yeah, you divide your literary text into the 3 major genres of poetry, drama, and fiction. And that allows you to have the full English kind of classes in high school, which your older literary anthologies always had. It was about 4 to or 3 to 1. Nonfiction was 1/4, or 1/5, I mean, approximately speaking, of the total amount of literature. You had plays every year. I'm sure you all traditionally knew that you had a major piece of dramatic literature every year. It gets lost in there, and it introduces far more informational, so-called informational nonfiction text than English teachers can handle, because it reduces the amount of critical thinking that can be developed by reading between the lines of complex literary text, which is where analytical critical thinking comes from in the English class.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question, but Mary Della, please clarify, when you talk about taught curriculum, what do you mean by that? Because we're always told that standards are standards, not curriculum. They don't tell teachers what to teach, how to teach. But when you say that to me as a parent, I'm just like, wait, what does that mean when you're talking about standards being taught curriculum? We're supposed to, I thought, guide way away from that and just set frameworks, but not establish. I mean, am I wrong or am I right? Because the language that's used to us that are more novice is that, oh, no, our standards don't teach curriculum. So please, would you elaborate on that, please?
Can I bridge
Well,
it?
in the,
There you go.
all I was trying to say, I was following up on Danette's point that, standards identify what you want students, the goals you have for your students. But standards don't tell you, I'm going to spend 10% of the instructional time on writing and 40% on literature text and 22% on it doesn't do that.
So,
That's what I'm
if I can bridge it
concept.
a little bit, I think what Dr. Stafke was saying is that by separating those two separately, and only having those two and not like separating out multiple literary text genres, a teacher might assume then that means there should be a 50-50 split between those two skill sets. Now, an individual district though is gonna make the decision, like how much control do I have over text selection? So like, for example, like in my district, we have at like the middle school level, we say we have like a trimester based on literary fiction. We have a trimester based on literary nonfiction. We have a trimester based on drama, film, and poetry. That's like how we at our local level have interpreted our standards as far as like what we think is an appropriate
Can I ask you a
school.
question? Because this is a concern also, so attached are the appendix, and we talked about that briefly, and will there be an appendix with this set of standards?
Think it's
No.
just-
You can't
no,
use-
Okay, and that's why I wanna make
Yeah.
sure,
Yeah.
because I know that there was an
That's
appendix
in the law.
attached to the
Right.
Common
I think it
Core.
says no.
So that leaves, if we do this right, there'll be more autonomy for districts to choose what they want to do
Right.
and not
Right.
guide
Right.
it.
Yes.
Yes, am I right?
That's
We won't
absolutely
write it.
We
And-
will not
Right.
specify
Glossary,
text.
yes. And I do know teachers that in their literature classes, or in their English classes, I should say, choose to teach the informational text and the literature together along with video. So they truly integrate, and that provides opportunities for students to think at higher levels, to make those connections between literary text and between informational text and between digital print resources.
When you say higher level, would you expand on what exactly you mean by that? What do you mean by higher level?
Like critical thinking skills such as,
But how do you do that by actually combining the three? I'm just curious.
for example, you might teach about a certain topic, let's talk about persuasion, topic of persuasion. And you might have students read a fictional story that talks about a character that used persuasive techniques. All right, and then you might, have the student read an article about, persuasive techniques that are commonly used. Then you might have students watch a video clip about, maybe persuasive techniques. Then you could ask give the students a prompt about, think about the resources that you just watched and you just viewed. What are, based on what you've read and what you've seen, what are some common persuasive techniques that were used by characters? Were these effective? Why or why not? So the student makes connections between literature and between informational text and between digital resources.
And I would like to speak to
That's-
that at the level
yes.
that your daughter
Yeah.
is, okay,
Yes.
for 11th and 12th grade. A comparable example might be having students read The Adventures of Huck Finn, which develops a theme that has to do with, civil disobedience and, the rights of all human beings in America. And you could read with that Benjamin Banneker's, in fact, we also do, Benjamin Banneker's letter to Thomas Jefferson, which is a very complex text, by the way. To, ask Jefferson to oppose slavery. You could add to that Wendell Phillips' speech, in the Civil War, asking his fellow Republicans, and it was a complex speech. So you've got a letter, you've got a speech, you've got, and asking them to support the right of Black Americans to fight in the Union. You could add to it a document we all know that is quite complex called the Declaration of Independence. So you would put all those together because thematically they support the same.
Right. And those are the rich, that's the rich way to teach, integration.
But I do think this is a perfectly timed question because what we were supposed to start today with, right, was looking at the reading nonfiction text strand. And so the question then at the standards framework level, right, is at the most minimal, right, you could just have reading standards, right? You could not specify at all like what text you're reading. You could just say, show me standards do, right? They specify fiction, poetry, drama, nonfiction work. But you could just keep it like these are the reading skills you want to teach. Doesn't matter what you're reading, right? These are the reading skills. Or you could go the opposite extreme, right, and specify like 28 different genres of literature, and these are the reading skills unique to this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. That becomes, in my opinion, a little bit hard to manage from a teacher's perspective because there's just so many. The question for me then becomes, is there a difference in what a reading skill looks like when you're reading a literary text as opposed to what that same skill looks like if you're reading an informational text? That would be the argument I would say to split them apart.
So on that point, and then like picking up on Meridol and Dr. Stutzky's points, I mean, it sounds like what was exciting to me about what you just said was, you're putting everything together. You're saying let's do all of it together instead of splitting it out into different groups.
That's the way it's generally done in our instruction at that
You were saying
level.
make it even, but keep it together so you're seeing the different genres, which is an interesting thought.
And that's where that cluster of integrate ideas and see relationships among texts
Yes.
comes in.
But
That's
where
what that's about.
Yeah, and
Right.
I get that, and I'm hearing that, it's kind of a new idea for me, so I appreciate that. So what I was thinking, about what Dr. Stutzky was saying was that what she wants to make sure of, as far as I'm interpreting what you're saying is correct, is that we don't wanna have 50-50, and that this implies 50-50, and you're saying it
It
doesn't
does not,
imply
that's the thing,
50-50.
it doesn't imply
And so,
that.
does it matter? We all agree that we don't want it to be 50-50, right? We all agree. So could we add in equal focus on,
I think
All
That's
four
not a
genres.
standard.
That's not a standard. That's
All four
curriculum.
genres.
It's not
Oh,
a
that's a
standard.
curriculum?
That's curriculum, it's not a standard. And as a matter of fact, though I know an argument has been made, and it's not our job to get into it, but I will just clarify where I think some of that confusion comes from, is that in the Common Core standards, there are the literacy standards for social studies and science. And so the notion is, if you have all literacy together, then you're probably gonna do 25-30% of nonfiction texts in in an English class, and the rest of those nonfiction texts will be text students read in science and social studies and other subject-specific classes.
Yes.
Yeah, so, and that's not accounted for sometimes by people who present this criticism. That said, it's irrelevant. Our strands have nothing to do with the percent that we put in, we advise teachers to spend, the
Because it
amount of
looks like
time they're supposed to
20%
spend on
being-
writing.
Right, when you
Yeah.
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 And one of
Then
the
you
things
get
we talked
20%
about-
in each of those, and it doesn't work that way, it's integrated in.
If we go back to what we said we wanted for standards and what we didn't want for standards, what we wanted for standards was fewer strands. As we looked across a variety of standards, we wanted to make sure that we had fewer strands so that it would be more compact that way. And I feel like we strive to get there by making it the 4 now 5.
Well, I'm sure in Karen's field, students read a lot of nonfiction text, and students are required to take courses.
Yeah.
And so it is comprehensive.
Let me ask the opinion, how many people think it could be put together into
can't
these?
find
The literary text and the nonfiction?
Yeah.
It goes back to the same issue then, Danette, that you brought up with the language standard. To what extent you want to emphasize that our students need to learn informational text, how to read them. And I for one am going to be a strong advocate on that side because, and I realize I'm coming from the angle of someone who teaches both high school, did teach high school and now teaches just college, but has taught both and a coordinator for a suburban district. And so what I know is we want our students to be able to take the AP language test, which is gonna deal exclusively with nonfiction text. We want them to be able to take the AP Lit test, which is gonna deal exclusively with literature text. We want them to pass the ACT test with the best score they can. On the reading portion of that, 3/4 of it is informational text and 1/4 of it is a literary text. Now, should the strands be governed by the tests? Maybe not, but honestly, we want our kids to pass the ACT test. We want them to have the opportunity to take some of those advanced level tests that are, indicative of college readiness. And if they pass those tests, they don't take those courses at college. If they don't pass the test, they're still gonna have to take a literature course at college and a composition reader test course. I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but that's why,
Well,
to
and
me,
the
it's
compass and
important.
ASVAB tests as well.
Right,
for
yeah,
this
there you go. Yes.
Informational.
Absolutely.
And I remember
Absolutely.
graduating from high school and not having very much informational text at all. And going to college, and even as an English major, I did take courses that were devoted to literature. But like Mary Della said in an earlier meeting, most of our students aren't going to be English majors. They are going to be a major that deals with a composition 101 class or an English 101 class, and that text is going to be nonfiction. It's going to be essays. And I remember walking into a freshman level class and struggling with reading essays, complex essays, just because I didn't have enough exposure to it in high school. And I struggle with seeing those strands together because, right now, the AP Language juniors, they struggle with,
They struggle.
a lot, but they really struggle with that transition from literature, everything, that same, let's determine what the text is about, what's its theme, how does it make me feel, to looking at something, through the lens of an argument, and looking at something through the lens of a critical structural lens. That's a very difficult task. And, while many of those standards are the same, whether you are reading Huck Finn or you are reading Benjamin Banneker, you're going to approach those in similar ways, but it's not the exact same.
Oh, because a novel is very different structurally, which goes back to analyze, craft, and structure as a cluster, as we know, is very, very different from a 5-paragraph letter that somebody has written to another person, you know, that Benjamin Banneker wrote to Thomas Jefferson, or that a speech that Wendell Phillips gave to fellow Republicans in the Civil War. It's just, those texts are different enough that it's very confusing to students if they just think, well, a text is a text, it's all the same.
And then I'm wondering, you know, we talked about language being embedded before, and then we've kind of gone to that decision of, well, maybe we need to pull it out to really make sure that it gets the focus and emphasis it needs. I'm wondering if we tried to do that with nonfiction, would it have the same effect? I don't know. I'm wondering,
I don't
would
know
have that- if
either,
it would kind
because
of get
we've
lost.
had it in the standards. See, I mean,
That's
it's
gonna
in
stay.
the current standards, and then it was in
So it
the
doesn't really matter
standards
where we put it.
before.
That's-
No, that's the
Right.
level of Todd curriculum,
Yeah.
that's
Districts
what
are gonna
I'm
do what
saying.
they
That's
want.
true.
Well,
Yeah.
I think
Teach
that's a-
what they want.
They're
That's a
teaching it,
point,
they're not gonna
for
teach
people
it.
who have concerns with what's being taught, concerns about your own kids and what you've seen, maybe it would be helpful to go to your local district and ask to see the curriculum, because that's done locally, and that's
We
what.
have. I have.
Can you not tell that there are
Well, I can tell, I mean.
missing points and?
No, I mean, I can't tell, and I can tell, my interpretation comes from my children, not me being able to look at a curriculum. I mean, I'm sorry, that's not my field, I'm very good at my field, that's not my field.
I understand.
So the issue becomes, the interpretation for me, I mean, where I pick up on, you know, what's happening is interpreted through my children and their lack of knowledge or knowledge based on, I feel, their aptitude. So, you know, yes, do I always ask for a book list? I wanna understand what's going on. I am incredibly involved, almost a nuisance, that I want to, I mean, legitimately, I'm one of those parents, because I want to know if there's a gap in my kid that I can see, where is it? So I'm constantly emailing, doing my parent-teacher, conferences, I'm there. But I know where my kids even feel, they can articulate they feel their deficiencies, they can articulate that themselves.
Yes,
Because they're very articulate, so it's easy to say, as a parent, I need to just jog on in and say, hey, can I see your curriculum? Makes no sense to me. My children make sense to me, and so I can interpret, and they, at this point now, when they're little, which is a different, right, a group, I was involved in a different way, but now they can actually articulate where they feel deficits and they feel insecure, and just like my daughter, you know, I mean, she's a perfectionist, but to her the point with her is she feels incredibly deficient in her writing abilities, in her grammar, and she knows it and is incredibly insecure because she is feeling that. And she was feeling that as a
That would be
freshman.
another argument, by the way, for keeping these as separate strands, because the nonfiction texts are beautiful models for writing.
Well,
They
and that's
are.
the thing,
Emphasizing
honestly,
that is really good.
that is where I say with, I mean, the nonfiction, I mean, the fiction though, is what she just, I mean,
Right.
that's, it
Right.
is, but
It's
that's
more
what
compelling. Yeah, it's
you
so
are a
compelling.
reader. I mean,
Yeah.
I can see my son, who's a different kid, and he's very high also, but he does not just ingest, I mean, she'll read 4 books a week.
Mhm.
For him to read, it has to be fiction, or you're gonna lose, I mean, it doesn't have to be, but he's gonna check out at
And you
nonfiction.
know, oddly, it's
Fiction
often
takes him to a
there's,
different place.
you know, voice line
And
lines.
so fiction is really, I think, important,
Mhm.
an important piece in developing
Yes.
good writers.
Absolutely.
You're talking to the
Yes.
choir here, girl.
I know.
It's
I mean,
not
I
this.
just
Don't
know
agree with
that
it.
it's
Yes.
just a huge, I mean, I have 2 very different
Yeah.
high school kids.
Yeah.
But I know that for both of them, that's what's developed their, I mean, their language, that you, I mean, that's how they speak. I mean, that's, like I said with Sophie, your point, she's constantly pronouncing something wrong. I'm like, but she uses it in context, which is so weird to me. But you just spoke to that, and it's because of her, she just, she reads it.
Can I?
So-
Mayor Dillon,
So kudos to her.
agree that if we as a work group do a really good job with making sure that progression from grade level to grade level within that nonfiction, because I think in the past, standards have done a better job with that grade level to grade level progression with literary versus the nonfiction, don't you agree? You know where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
That if we do a better job of making it meaningful, rather than just stating it and repeating it over and over, but actually making
Cause you're
that
looking right now
meaningful.
from the viewpoint of somebody who teaches middle school.
Right.
And what happens by the time
If you
kids
look at-
get to be juniors,
Yeah.
they are totally baffled by complex, significant nonfiction texts. Like even something like the Declaration of Independence, let alone a science
Right.
text that's complicated, or a social studies theory text about revisionist history or something like that. They're nowhere.
Because if you
They
look at
are nowhere.
even our old GLEs and even the Missouri, the current Common Core learning standards, and you look at that 6, 7, and 8, it blends together. There's really not a lot of progression of the content for me.
Make the changes, make the progression
But-
more obvious.
Yes, it needs
Yeah.
to be more obvious, it needs to be more stated.
But sometimes your progression changes as a result of the complexity of your stimulus material.
Which probably also would need to be articulated, I would think.
Right.
Because,
So if
because
you
then
have
it's
sixth
not
grade
like
stimulus
a,
material, but your 7th grade stimulus material is more complex.
Right.
And then your 8th
Right,
grade,
but yeah.
reading
But I
passage is
see-
more complex.
I see Casey's point, when we sat down and tried to develop curriculum, we looked at, we took those standards and we tried to pull them apart. And when we tried to pull them apart, we said, like we're looking at 7th grade, so let's look at the 7th grade standard and look at the 6th grade standard and say, what did 6th grade already do? And that doesn't belong in 7th grade, we're not gonna reteach everything that was already taught. And so we wanted to make sure we pulled it apart, but sometimes it didn't feel like we could clearly articulate,
Right.
what is my job as a 7th grade teacher,
And
that
what's
wasn't
the
already the
difference?
job of the 6th grade teacher, that's not also the job of the 8th grade teacher, and maybe sometimes they don't change because of the complexity of the
Complexity
text.
of the
But I feel like that
text
has to be
increases.
something that needs to be articulated, so that
Right.
we can go, okay, I know what the difference here is, the difference here is text gets harder.
Right, but if that's not happening, then it's stagnant.
Yeah.
And then they
Right.
get up to that higher level and they're lacking.
Right.
You were.
Well, we keep kind of talking over some of the points that we talked about initially. If I look back over at what we liked and what we didn't like, what we didn't like is that the South Carolina ones lacked progression, which we're addressing. We liked that there was a narrow focus on the grammar skills, which we've been talking about. What we didn't really like about Massachusetts was the heavy emphasis on literature, the siloed focus on the specific genres. I mean, if we go back to what we originally talked about as what we liked and we didn't like,
Right.
we're there, but we just keep going back over
Yeah,
those points.
we need to move.
And adding to that point, I'll just say one quick thing, which is that, we're looking at, I'm looking at the clusters, we wanna know what the end skills are. What I liked about what Dr. Satsky said was that she was concerned about doing some critical thinking. I'm not saying that we would or wouldn't, I'm not arguing the point in the group, I'm just saying what I liked about what she said is she was looking to the end goal of what you want to achieve. And maybe when we're looking at progressions, what's the result? Maybe our clusters, you know, maybe we need to think those, broaden those.
Well, speaking to that about critical thinking, I believe in every single one of those, you would embed many opportunities for students to do critical thinking. Okay, so I don't think that's kind of a given.
Yeah, I wasn't, and that was a bad point,
Within their written
example.
standards.
I
Right.
shouldn't have given you an example, I'm saying like, what are our end goals and are they achieved? With that, through our, you know, our clusters, and
That's a good point. Yep.
maybe that goes to your progression
Yeah.
point, it's different
Yeah.
during progression.
And until we
That's
start
what I'm
getting
saying.
into,
Yes.
that's a later thing.
We
The
gotta make
progression
sure
is
we
later.
have it in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just talking in kind of overarching terms right now. Okay, so it is, just about, that's a little fast according to my computer, which is probably always right, so, it's almost 11:45, so two things I'd like us to decide before I walk out the door. The first thing is, or it doesn't really matter what order. One thing is, what time are we coming back? And the other thing is, what are we doing when we get here?
Can I answer the second question, or at least propose an idea?
Yeah.
Could we try to brainstorm what, like we did last time, like what would be clusters or what would be standards we would want to see in a reading nonfiction text strand? And if we decide that it's very similar to what we have in the reading literary text strand, then we can combine them. And if we decide that they're very different, then let's keep them different. But maybe that's a way to tease this out a little more.
Could we also talk about, under the reading literary text, could we also consider making those four genres be under that heading? And, I mean, it looks to me like we've got two, literary and.
They're automatically under.
Yeah.
That's
Like in the
inherent.
choice.
At each
Yeah.
grade level, that's when you flush them out.
And I know we talked about that last time because we wanted to make sure, one of the things we did not wanna do was limit
Right.
what is read. So we wanted to make sure we kept it open, because one of the things we said we didn't like is that there's a emphasis on you will read this. So we don't wanna limit it, so I think what we need to talk about, I could be wrong, I think what we need to talk about is how do we keep it from being limited?
And
You know.
keep in mind, sixth grade is still an elementary level, so to speak. I know we put it in middle school, but they still do a lot of drama and poetry and.
Well, they should be all the way through 12.
Spelling.
We did drama and poetry in 12, yeah.
I
So it should be the same.
Yeah, all AP Lit does is that, it doesn't do any informational text unless you read essays analyzing literary text, yeah.
But if you don't specify genre eventually, then it's going to be missed.
Sure.
I mean,
Right.
like drama,
That's
I think
right.
drama is
Strand.
probably.
But again,
Yeah, I
If
mean,
we're
exactly.
talking specific standards,
Yeah,
would meet
yeah,
those.
right.
the show.
The
It's just
specific
say you're talking
standards
about
would flush it
Yeah.
out.
Right.
Right.
Well, I am, because to
Like a
me, the
subcluster
nonfiction needs to
under-
go under there, I don't think.
Well, and again, it's in the show me standards, which we can't touch by the law, right?
Right.
It says reading and evaluating fiction, poetry, and drama, and reading and evaluating nonfiction works and material. And then they, in
It's just
parentheses,
gonna
say
come down to our
biography and
organization.
Yeah.
It's really just an
Yeah, we're gonna
organization.
say the same things. and we're
Yeah,
gonna
we
be
don't want that
separate
lost
again.
either. I don't want that lost. I don't want to speak for
It's
anybody
just
else.
how we
I don't want that lost
organize
because I want my seniors reading
All of the
high
above.
level
All of the
drama
above. Yeah.
also. And watching it really, I'd love them to engage in watching that. That's my little 2 cents in there. And then before you run out, what time are we coming back? 12:30? 45 minutes? Okay, so I'm hearing now, I saw it's meatloaf, I'm hearing no opposition.
Meatloaf, Tracy.
We're gonna go
Downstairs?
outside.
Is it? Meatloaf.
Okay,
And I don't know what.
I checked it out when I got my.
Yeah, I already went there.
They did this over at lunch.
Oh, I gotta see that
Okay.
one.
Something else over there.
Okay.
So, who's going to that? Let's see if we'll have 9. Yeah, let's see if we'll have at least 9 to meet. Who's going to see Dr. Stotsky?
I might not be there, but I might not be back for the workshop.
Okay, so, well, let's just see, who does not think they'll be back at 12:30, I guess would be my better question then. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and we have 14, so that's 10, so we should be good to go. We're gonna start with nonfiction, okay? And then, that's what we're gonna do, so, back at, it's actually 11:44, that is fast, so I'm not cheating you out of your time.
12:30.
12:30. And that means you've actually used the restroom before you come back in the room. Just so you.
Thanks, Mom.
We was in a little PD session on Thursday.
Good to see you, Linda.
Very tiny one.
Oh, Linda.
She's like, and that means the conversation
Oh,
starts at this time. No,
Yeah,
you
let's
come
talk
back in the
about
room.
it.
Are you having fun in the lower level group?
Now,
It's like when the kids ask me.
Well, we can't, but we have to make a match. Don't you think we have to start with the big stuff first and then make a match? Well, if we, we know.
There's a thing right in front of you. To me, it's like, I've always thought of arguing as a bad.
You know,
Right.
start with strands.
Right. And that's just me, you know? Don't argue with your brother.
Well, I understand. I thought we were planning to meet together one day in December. Isn't that part of it? No?
I would suggest, suggest that after we get our framework, that somehow, some way,